Northwest Now is supported, in part, by viewers like you. Thank you.
Pat O'Day is a Northwest media icon. He ruled the airwaves when radio was king, and the biggest names in music didn't sell files, but sold records and toured the country, many brought here by Concerts West. What's Pat O'Day doing these days? What does he think of this new media landscape? We're catching up next on Northwest Now. If you grew up listening to KJR radio, watching the hydroplane races, going to local dance clubs, or attending mega concerts, you were part of Pat O'Day's world. Did you also know he set the world nonstop water skiing record around Lake Washington? That he was part of bringing Jimi Hendrix to global prominence as his first manager? That he worked exclusively with Elvis Presley for live concerts? Those are just a few of the ventures O'Day managed during the heyday of radio and rock and roll. Pat O'Day, great to have you here on Northwest Now. You've been a guest that's been on my radar for a long time, so it's great to get you in studio. Speaking of being in studio in Tacoma, you have quite a history, not only at Bates Technical College, which is our licensee, but also in Tacoma as well. Lay that out for me a little bit.
We moved from Nebraska to Tacoma. My father did. He was a minister of a church here in 1941. So I grew up going to Bryant Grade School and Jason Lee, and I worked as a young man out at the midget auto race track, which was at 12th and Sprague, was the baseball park, and then became the midget auto racing track. I sold pop. I worked at Tiger Park when it was at 38th and Lawrence. I worked on the ground crew, watering the grass during the day, selling pop in the stands at night, and pitching batting practice to Dick Grieco late in the afternoon because I was a little league pitcher. And you know, I loved Tacoma. Moving then to Bremerton for a while after my father had died, but coming back to go to Bates, to then called Tacoma Vocational, and under Merle Kimball and John McClamrock, the great leaders of that class at that time, I got my start in radio. My dad had a program on KMO Tacoma every morning at 9:15. So I used to go to the station with him, and if you had asked me when I was 9, you know, do you want to be a pilot or a doctor? No, I want to be in radio.
You got bid early, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. And so thanks to Tacoma Vocational, they got me my first job in Astoria, Oregon, and it just went up from there. Astoria to Longview to Yakima to Seattle in 1958.
Yeah, that's how you used to do it. I did the same thing. My first gig was in Yakima, and that's how the game used to be played then. Moving up in markets, and so you were able to work yourself back home.
Yeah, and frankly, radio broadcasting was much better in those days because we had so much talent, so many people aspired. They worked in the small markets, then moved into the bigger markets, and there was personality and there was companionship in broadcasting that's absent now. You know, you hear somebody say, hey, good times and great oldies 4 times an hour, and that's
they're in
it.
Dallas.
Yeah.
And
right.
You know, I'm sure you're sick of people telling you this, but I'm going to do it here on the air. You know, I grew up listening to you.
Oh, you did?
So you're not only a guest, you're also, like I said, you've been on my list here for a long time.
Well, I loved the biggest mistake I ever made. They appointed me finally as general manager of KJR. I'd been program director and national program director for the company, but they made me general manager and I left the air. Of course, I was only 32, and to be appointed the general manager of Seattle's biggest radio company, you know, but in retrospect, I loved being on the air, and I forever feel badly about the day I left the air.
And you gesture about that community piece that radio used to be. You used to pull 42 shares back in the day. Now you're lucky to get a 1 or a 2.
Oh, I know.
It's so fragmented, and while there are more voices and more opportunities, there's so much, they reach such a small piece of the audience. I really feel that community cohesiveness in that kind of common language that we had as a result of who we listened to and what the great hits were, that's something we've lost.
Yeah, we truly have. And it all began, we let the big corporations buy all the stations. Now they run the thinking out of Chicago, and they don't want any surprises. There's a program director in Chicago that says, you will read these cue lines and that will be it. You know, well, the charm goes away.
Yeah, that local piece. Do you still keep in touch with the old guys on that staff?
Yeah, we've got a group called the Old Club, and we meet once a year. and all of the old KJR and KOL disc jockeys and record promotion people, and we get together and tell everybody how great we were. And
yeah, and no lies there though.
yeah,
true.
It's a lot.
You brought this DVD in that I wanted you to talk a little bit about, and this touches on a broader theme of, I think a lot of people underestimate Tacoma's role in the history of the Northwest music scene. Talk a little bit about this guy and lay that Tacoma piece on us for folks who don't know.
I enjoy telling this story because I'm so fond of what happened in Tacoma. Rock and roll got its, Northwest rock and roll got its start here. It wasn't just the Ventures, but which went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but there was the Wailers, and there was Little Bill and the Blue Notes, and there was the Sonics. There were names like Kent Morrill and Buck Ormsby, Ron Gardner, D'Angelo, Rick D'Angelo, and so on, that were the foundation of grunge. Because Rick Cobain was down in Astoria, or down in Aberdeen rather, going to my dances out at the dunes in Westport, hearing the Wailers and forming those ideas, because the Wailers were doing edgy things with the guitars. And you listen to Louie Louie and some of those songs, they were so far ahead of their time. So Tacoma has a rich heritage. Buck Ormsby passed recently, Kent Morrill passed away, but Kent, after the Wailers broke up, went to Las Vegas, because I used to bring Roy Orbison on tour, and I would have the Wailers go on tour with Roy Orbison, and Roy would say, "Pat, Kent Morrill's voice sounds just like mine." He said, "It's amazing." Well, Kent heard that, so Kent went to Las Vegas, and after Roy had died, and auditioned to be Roy in the Legends in Concert, and then came back, and so we put a group together, and we toured the Northwest and did things because he could do Roy Orbison like nobody. And so anyway, we made a little CD here that hope you can play someday, and salute Kent and great Tacoma musicians.
Your book here, it was all just rock and roll, a great read that really details your long history and concert promotion and everything else, but you gestured at this in your last comment talking about the dance clubs. That's really how you got your start. Where did those dance clubs operate? Spanish Castle, of course, where Jimi Hendrix was, I don't know if he was discovered there, but kind of got rolling there a little bit as a player. Talk a little bit about the dance club scene back in the day.
Well, now I'm a disc jockey, okay, and I was only making in Astoria $200 a month. Now, of course, money was different then, but nevertheless, it was skinny money. So to make extra money for my family, I started teenage dances at the National Guard Armory. Well, that carried on as I went to Longview and then to Yakima. And so by the time I got to Seattle, I was very accustomed to running teenage dances. So I soon joined the Wailers in opening the Spanish Castle, and that led to the Crescent here in Tacoma, down to 13th and Fawcett, and Lake Hills Roller Rink in Bellevue, and Parker's, and the Burlington Roller Dome, and Westport, and pretty soon we were running dances statewide. In the summertime, we were running up to 50 dances a week across, and we could hire the acts, you see, inexpensively then, because there was no concert business. So I could have Roy Orbison or Jerry Lee Lewis, Jan and Dean, the Beach Boys, Ray Charles, Fats Domino, you know, unbelievable at teenage dances. Throughout the Northwest.
So there was no concert business.
No.
And then here comes, you're now combining some of these ideas, the radio piece, the DJ piece, the promotions piece, the dance club piece. You start putting together this idea for Concerts West. And I don't think people quite understand how big of a deal you were in that industry and how radically you changed, almost kind of invented that industry. Talk a little bit about Concerts West and what that allowed to happen.
Well, it all kind of started when the late Zolly Volchok and I ran the World's Fair opening twist party at the Orpheum Theater in Seattle with Chubby Checker and Dee Dee Sharp and so on. And so then the World's Fair was ending, and I started running shows in the Opera House in Seattle. I'd run the Spring Spectacular, the Summer Spectacular, because you could bring in a lot of acts. I had one show that had the Beach Boys, the Four Seasons, Johnny Rivers, and Little Stevie Wonder all on the same show. Then we brought the Beatles to town and sold out Key Arena, which was then called the Coliseum. and my eyes were opened. I said, wow, do we have something here? So now I started running shows in Key Arena, the Rolling Stones, the Mamas and Papas, the Righteous Brothers, and the Beach Boys back to town and so on, Bobby Vinton, the Osmonds. And I'm also running shows, these same shows in Vancouver and Portland. Well, the acts are telling me that they like working for me better than, because you see the concert business was in infancy, and a lot of people were doing it wrong. The sound was wrong, the lights were wrong.
Transportation, a nightmare.
It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
And the tickets wouldn't be sold. So my partner, Terry Bassett, and I said, Terry, let's do it. So we opened an office in Dallas, changed the name from Pat O'Day and Associates to Concerts West. Our first client was my friend Jimi Hendrix, and that led us to Three Dog Night and Led Zeppelin and Bad Company, Steppenwolf, Creedence Clearwater, Moody Blues, Linda Ronstadt, the Eagles, Jackson Browne, Neil Diamond, Frank Sinatra.
All these names are dropping. I think it's important for people to know too that these aren't just, this isn't an email you wrote. You had personal relationships. That was a relationship business.
Yes, totally. Yeah. And we handled all their appearances in the United. We got a call in '69 from a gentleman who handled this particular act, but we would pay all the expenses of the tour. Danny Kaye and Les Smith, the movie star who started the Seattle Mariners, they became my partners also in the concert business. But anyway, we would pay all the expenses of the tour, everything. All the act had to do was show up and play, and then at the end of the tour, we'd sit down, pay all the bills, give the act 85% of the profit, we would keep 15. This guy said, you only get 10% for my act. We succumbed to his greed, because that was Colonel Parker, the act was Elvis Presley. And our little Seattle company handled every appearance of Elvis from '69 until his death.
Great segue. I've got this picture here, and you said there was a great story behind this with your relationship with Elvis. Talk a little bit about this picture, and we'll bring it up full screen here for people to see.
Okay, well, Colonel, this goes way back before we handled the concert business. It's 1962, and Elvis is in Seattle filming his picture at the World's Fair.
Right.
I get a call from the Colonel, and the Colonel says, would you like to be in the picture with Elvis? Oh my God, are you kidding me? In the movie with Elvis, right? He said, do you have another disc jockey or two you'd like to bring along? I said, yeah. So I brought Lan Roberts and Lee Perkins from my disc jockeys and went to the fairgrounds that day because the Colonel said be there at 2 o'clock. And he's Elvis wearing coat and tie, so wear coat and tie and so on. So I was there, all excited. I mean, you talk about showbiz, right? I'm going to be in the picture with Elvis. Elvis came down from the Space Needle down to the tent, the Paramount tent, and the Colonel said, and there were some people from RCA there, and he said, hey, you all get together here. Pat, Pat, you've met Elvis, yeah? And he said, let's get together here. And he had the photographer, he said, come on over here and shoot this. And he came over and shot the picture. And the Colonel walked over to me and said, Pat, congratulations, you've now been in a picture with Elvis.
Gotcha.
Colonel Parker's sense of humor was a thing of beauty.
Talk to me a little bit about that moment before a concert when you really got that business rocking and you're in Key Arena with 40,000 people or whatever the capacity was back at the Coliseum then, and Led Zeppelin's getting ready to come out and the amplifiers are humming, the band hasn't come out yet, you've been responsible for putting all this together. What does that feel like?
You know, at that time, it's just what you do. As I think back to many moments, I say, oh my God, I was there.
Yeah.
I did that. But at that time, you don't think that way. You say, oh God, the lights are okay, yeah, okay, fine. You need passes to get back, okay, fine. And you know, it's what you do.
Yeah.
It's like in radio. Every day I'd finish my show and say, I got to do better the next day.
Yeah.
You don't say, boy, this is great. I got a 40 share. Nobody's ever had a 40 share in the Puget Sound area in history. You don't think of that. You say, how can I make it 42 tomorrow?
You bring up all these things, and I want to ask you about the work piece too. if you think about the concert promotion and the DJing and the dance clubs, you were doing a lot of these things simultaneously. Before there was emails, before there were cell phones, before there was technology to help you organize, manage, and track projects. How in the world did you coordinate all these things? And did it have an effect on your health? I mean, how in the world? I read some of the excerpts from your book, and I say to myself, I don't know how he did it. I really don't.
Well, I think it started as a youth. My father died. He was a minister in Tacoma, but he died when I was 14, and ministers had no money then, and I had to go to work. I would go to school till noon and then had a full-time job. And I think you just become accustomed as a youth to the fact that there's a lot of hours in the day and you can get a lot done during the day. And I don't know how we got it all done either, but I knew, every weekend I ran KJR Monday through Friday, and by Friday night I'd be on a plane to Dallas or Chicago or somewhere so we could be on stage with our acts, because they always...
You've been coordinating for weeks.
Yeah. Well, we built a good team of people around us,
Yeah.
But I was very blessed. I was given, by Danny Kaye and Les Smith, they just turned that radio station over to me. They said, Pat, whatever you want to do it. And having that freedom allowed us to reconnoiter new areas of entertainment and promotion and rock and roll radio.
Yeah.
And so given those opportunities, the opportunities are what allowed me then to go for, I didn't know any better. I'm given the chance, I got to do it, right?
I wouldn't say this is funny, it's just kind of strange. It's strange. There is a whole population of people living in Seattle who've moved here from California or wherever, coming to build this new city, a Seattle without a bubble vader. I mean, this place that's very different to people who grew up here. Who know you only as the Schick Shadle guy.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing to you? Oh, you're the Schick Shadle? You must say, man, you have no idea.
I went from Mr. Rock and Roll to Mr. Hydroplane, because, I was the voice of the Unlimited for 40 years, and then I became the Schick Shadle guy.
Yeah.
And thank God for Schick Shadle. I'd be dead by now if it weren't for them.
Yeah.
But some friends gathered in my living room in 1986, and they said, Pat, you're going too far. That was kind of tough because a couple of them owed me money, and what are they doing telling me? But went to Schick Shadle, and 2 weeks later I was out of there to never have another drink, never do anything. And it saved my life, because here I'm 83 and I'm in perfect health. And without Schick Shadle, we who quit drinking before we're 60 that are regular drinkers, New England Journal of Medicine says, we had 10 years to our life expectancy and forestalled dementia by that same period.
I want to circle back to something because I think you can add some unique perspective on this. You lived the rock and roll concert lifestyle in the 60s and the 70s.
Oh, yes.
You've had a substance abuse issue. You've seen effective treatment. What do you make of, and what is your reaction to this new wave of this opioid epidemic hitting our youth and musicians? This must be like a bad nightmare for you to see this all again.
It's so serious. It's so serious. And the medical community really has no solutions. Schick Shadle, of course, is, and we sold the hospital so the treatment will grow. That is the only treatment in the U.S. that actually slams the door for most on those addictions.
Aversion therapy.
Yeah, the aversion therapy. But it's a tragedy what's going on. The heroin epidemic is over the top. I have a dear friend that called me. She's just in tears. Her daughter's in Everett. She's lost. They can't find her. She was brilliant. She's a University of Washington graduate, and she's on heroin, and she can't be found. And
you've kind of lost 2 generations of friends to this. Which is,
yes. And it's so sad, but first of all, we got to stop the input of heroin coming across the border. We got to get the substance out, and pharmacists have to be more careful about who gets those prescription drugs and all those things that trigger the addictive receptors in our genes.
Let's fast forward here a little bit to let folks know what you're doing today. Where are you living? What are you doing? How do you pass the time? What mountains do you still have to climb?
Well, I'm the premier property director for Windermere Real Estate on San Juan Island. So I work hard. My wife is the leading land use attorney in the county. So we managed to stay busy. Then I'm still very involved with the hospital. I do the key lecture to the patients that I was trained to do by the physicians years ago. And so every 8th day I'm there talking to that round of patients, explaining what's happening in their brain to bring the habit to a halt. And then in addition to that, I do a lot of high school reunions, and I do speeches, and I just did a thing for the Bellevue or the East Side Improvement Club and so on, and that motivates me.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. And I don't want to, this question sounds more personal than I intend it to be, but I just know how things used to be. You listen to old rock and roll performers and guys who were in certain industries, and the way the money worked then, you didn't get a fraction of the action, man. You got your week's paycheck. You didn't get there wasn't royalties. There wasn't
Right.
So were you able to keep any of those bucks, or was the business different then, and you're still out making a living, or how did it work out for you?
I've had, the never give up. I'd made a lot of money.
Yeah.
I bought a lot of radio stations, but I also had made a $12 million loan with Barclay Bank of London to buy another station, and the loan was at 4 points over prime, changing monthly, but it didn't matter because prime at the time was 1%.
Yeah.
So I was going 5 or 8. If it ever got to 8, I was still fine because I was cash flowing.
Right.
Well, Jimmy Carter was president. Prime got to 23, and I was paying 27% interest on $12 million.
Yeah.
So it was time to start all over again.
Yeah.
Sold the
Yeah.
stations, but again, have been very, very successful in the real estate business.
Good.
And never give up.
Yeah. And like I said, I only ask that not to get personal, but because how much those industries have changed over time. There are people who are doing syndicated television programs now who have generational wealth. They
Yes.
got a fraction of the action. They're done.
Yeah.
They never have to make a
Right.
living again in their lives ever
Right.
because of the way their deals were structured.
Right.
And you've seen it all when it comes to how deals are structured. So
Yeah.
that's why I was
yeah.
wondering what
Yeah.
your take was on it. Let's talk a little bit about the hydroplanes. You gestured at this too. Did you ever think there would be a day, A, without Pat O'Day on the mic with the hydros, and B, where they weren't going to be covered live anymore on at least some local broadcast TV station?
It's a sad thing for Seattle because the hydroplanes, unlimited hydroplane racing, is that foundation of seafair. It is the centerpiece of seafair, but the hydroplane owners have shot themselves in the foot. Part of it's my fault. It was in 1972 that my friend Jim Clapp, the late Jim Clapp of the Weyerhaeuser family, had built a yacht with twin turbine engines in it, and we were out doing a shakedown cruise, and I said, this is beautiful, because we were running 33 knots in a 60-foot boat, right? And he said, we ought to put these in your dumb hydros. And I thought about it for a while, and I said, well, why don't we do that? So we went to San Diego and had lunch with Bill Muncy to get his view on it. Bill said, that'll never work. It'll take waves over the front and put the flame out. And Jim Clapp said, I'll make it work. So we developed the U-95, the first turbine-powered hydroplane, and the first step to wrecking a sport.
Yeah.
Because it has no noise, and I'm sorry, you can't have a rock festival with acoustic guitars.
Yeah. I'm a Formula One fan, and they did the same thing in F1.
Yeah.
The fury of the sport, the intensity that comes from that audio experience has
Yeah.
been sucked out of it.
Yeah,
And I
the
think,
chest-pounding noise. And so the boats have gone away, and the race sites have gone away. It wasn't too many years ago, we had 12 race sites in one year when Bill Donor, the late Bill Donor was commissioner. We were in Hawaii, Dallas, Kansas City, Syracuse, so on. But now they're down to like 5 or 6 race sites, and it won't endure. They've got to get back to piston engines.
Yeah.
If they do that and get a lady driver involved, but if they'll do that, they can recreate the interest in the sport. But the route they're going now, I'm sorry, it's just a slow, agonizing death.
I'm right with you. When a jet flies by, my head may or may not turn. But when I hear an Allison or a Merlin or a radial engine, boy, I'll tell you, your head snaps right around, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Last question for you, and this is a little philosophical. What do do you hope your legacy is? When people think of Pat O'Day, and I hope you're around for another, I want to have you back, but when you think about legacy, what do you hope that is?
Interestingly, I hope that they will go back and study broadcasting the way we were doing it. What we were doing got me the award of Radio Man of the Year for the nation, and because what we were doing was totally out of the box. We were getting the finest of talent, giving them freedom, making them prepare their shows, but we insisted that every half hour they had to make the audience either laugh or cry or do something along with the music. It was perpetual emotion, but it was perpetual companionship. And if I leave any legacy, it's look at what we did back then and understand the elements, because you can do it again. People haven't changed, only radio changed.
I agree.
People have not changed at all. And I wish if I had another 20 years to live, I would go buy a bunch of stations and I would show them how you can bring a radio station to such dominance in a community by shocking them, by pleasing them, by making them smile, but by being their friend and their companion 24 hours a day.
Well, I would support you in that venture. All right. Pat O'Day, great conversation. Thanks so much for coming to Northwest Now. Like I said, you've been on my radar a long time. Glad to have you.
My joy. Thank you so much.
The bottom line, if you don't know Pat O'Day, it isn't on him, it's on you. I hope this program fixed that a little bit. To watch this program again or to share it with others, Northwest Now Digital can be found on the web at kbtc.org, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at Northwest Now. Thanks for taking a closer look on this edition of Northwest Now. Until next time, I'm Tom Layson. Thanks for watching.